What happens when something as personal as a personality trait ends up at the center of a huge legal battle? Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating case from the Philippine Supreme Court that explores that exact territory, the complex line between our own psychology and the letter of the law.
So really, it all comes down to this one big question. Can a deep-seated part of who you are actually be a legal justification for ending a marriage? And believe it or not, that was the precise question at the very heart of the Boado versus Boado case.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with the story of the couple, then we'll follow their case as it bounced through the courts. After that, we'll zero in on the key legal question, unpack the Supreme Court's thinking, and finally, get to the verdict.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning, with the people at the heart of this case. We have Ronald Boado, who filed the petition, and his wife, Florence Galvez Boado.
Their story goes back quite a ways, spanning nearly 20 years. They met back in '98, got married civilly in 2002, and even had a church wedding a couple of years later. They built a family, had 2 kids, but, and this is a key detail, a lot of their marriage was spent physically separated because of work overseas. And by 2016, things had completely broken down, and they officially separated.
So after they separated, Ronald filed a petition to have their marriage declared void. And his entire case, the whole thing, rested on a psychological evaluation. An expert diagnosed him with something called passive-aggressive personality disorder and said it likely stemmed from his childhood. The legal argument was that this disorder made him fundamentally incapable of being a husband in the ways the law requires, and that this condition was serious, permanent, and couldn't be cured.
Okay, so Ronald presents this pretty unique psychological argument. How did the courts react? Well, let's just say it wasn't straightforward. It turned into a real legal tug-of-war.
First up, the regional trial court looked at the evidence and sided with Ronald. They granted his petition, and the marriage was declared void. But when the case went up to the Court of Appeals, they did a complete 180. They reversed the decision, saying the evidence wasn't strong enough. The CA basically said that just falling out of love isn't the same as being psychologically incapable, so the marriage was back on.
So now you've got 2 lower courts saying completely opposite things. That's a huge legal problem, and when that happens, there's only one place left to go for a final answer. Ronald took his case all the way to the Supreme Court.
And this is where things get really fascinating, because the Supreme Court wasn't just ruling on one couple's future. They were digging into the very meaning of a super complex legal idea.
You see, this whole case revolves around a concept from the family code known as psychological incapacity. Now, the Supreme Court is crystal clear on this. This is a legal concept, not a medical one. It doesn't just mean someone's difficult or has issues. It means they have a genuine inability, like they truly can't, fulfill the absolute core duties of being married.
And this is a really important point the court makes right from the jump. This incapacity doesn't have to be obvious when you're saying "I do." It can show up years later, as long as you can prove it comes from a real, pre-existing psychological root cause.
Okay, so how did the Supreme Court actually work through this tangled mess? Let's get into the ratio decidendi. That's the fancy legal term for the core reasoning behind their final decision.
So because the lower courts couldn't agree on the facts, the Supreme Court decided to take a fresh look at all the evidence. And what they found was that Ronald's situation wasn't just a simple loss of love, like the Court of Appeals suggested. No, they saw it as something deeper, a part of his personality that was shaped way back in his childhood. This created a genuine inability, not just a refusal, to provide the kind of emotional support that a marriage needs. And all that time they spent physically apart just made that emotional gap even wider.
And then the court says something that really hits home. They directly connect this inability to the very soul of a marriage contract. They wrote that loving your spouse is a fundamental obligation. And because Ronald's psychological condition made him unable to fulfill that duty, they reasoned that he shouldn't be trapped in what was essentially an empty, loveless marriage.
So after laying out all that careful reasoning, the Supreme Court was ready to give its final answer.
And the verdict? The petition was granted. The Supreme Court overturned the Court of Appeals decision and reinstated the original ruling from the trial court. The marriage was declared void ab initio. That means, legally speaking, it's treated as if it never even existed in the first place.
So what's the big takeaway here? What's the core doctrine this case really locks in? Well, it confirms 2 things. First, that psychological incapacity can show itself long after the wedding bells have stopped ringing. And second, and maybe more importantly, that a deep-seated personality structure from your past, if it genuinely makes you unable to be a partner, is a valid legal reason to nullify a marriage.
You know, a case like this really leaves you thinking. It poses this profound question. As we learn more and more about the complexities of the human mind, how is the law supposed to keep up? It's a powerful reminder of just how connected the logic of the courtroom can be to the mysteries of the human heart. Thanks for joining me on this one.